I never thought I'd be the kind of person who runs away in the middle of the night. But here I was, Luca Bennett, a rejected Omega, climbing over the back wall of my alpha's mansion with bloody hands and a heart pounding so hard I thought my chest would explode. My breath came in ragged gasps, cutting through the frozen air like shattered glass. I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop, because if Caden Valeris caught me this time, there would be no second chances. No mercy, just disposal. That's what he called it. Disposal. Like I was trash that had outlived its usefulness. The word echoed in my mind as my boots slipped on the damp earth, sending me stumbling forward into the darkness. The forest loomed ahead, a mass of twisted branches and shadows that seemed to reach for me with gnarled fingers. Behind me, the mansion's lights blazed like angry eyes, always searching. I had maybe 10 minutes before Caden discovered I was gone. Maybe 15 if I was lucky. But luck hadn't been on my side for a very long time. My thin hoodie did nothing against the biting cold. February nights were brutal in this part of the country, and I was underdressed, underprepared, and bleeding from the gash on my wrist where I'd cut myself breaking the lab window. Caden's lab, the place where he'd tested his theories on me like I was some kind of science experiment instead of a living, breathing person. My heat cycles had become irregular 6 months ago, and instead of taking me to a proper doctor, he'd locked me in that sterile room and treated me like a defective product. Defective. That's what he called me when he was in a good mood. When he was angry, the names were much worse. I pushed through the undergrowth, branches whipping across my face and snagging on my clothes. My legs burned with exertion, muscles screaming for rest, but adrenaline kept me moving. I had no plan beyond getting as far away as possible. No destination, no safe house, no friends who would risk Caden's wrath by hiding me. I was utterly, completely alone. The howl that pierced the night air confirmed my worst fear. Trackers. Caden had released his trackers. I'd seen them before, the specially trained enforcers who could follow a scent trail for miles, who never gave up until they'd cornered their prey. My stomach twisted with terror. I wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough, and Omega's physical abilities were no match for trained hunters, especially not one as weakened and malnourished as I'd become over the past months. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning, vision blurring with tears I refused to shed. Crying wouldn't help. Crying never helped. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, night after night in that cold Dow while Caden took samples and made notes and talked about me like I wasn't even there. Then, without warning, blinding white light flooded my vision. I froze, throwing my hands up to shield my eyes. The sound of an engine rumbled through the trees, close enough that I could feel the vibrations in my bones. A vehicle, which meant people, which meant I had seconds to decide whether to run or take the biggest gamble of my life. The black SUV rolled to a stop directly in my path, its headlights turning the forest around me into a stage. I stood there, caught like a deer, blood dripping from my wrist onto the frost-covered ground. My first instinct screamed that this was Caden's doing, that he'd anticipated my escape route and positioned his guards accordingly. But then the driver's door opened, and the man who stepped to opt was not one of Caden's people. I knew that immediately, instinctively, the way prey animals know when a predator enters their territory. This man was tall, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders that strained against his dark jacket. His face looked like it had been carved from granite by an angry sculptor who specialized in sharp angles and harsh lines. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and his hair was black as midnight, slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that stopped my heart. Gray, cold, absolutely devoid of warmth or sympathy. They swept over me with the same clinical assessment a butcher might give a side of beef. His scent hit me like a physical blow. Cedar and smoke mixed with something darker, something that spoke of danger and violence and barely controlled power. Pure alpha pheromones, so strong they made my knees weak and my omega instincts scream at me to submit, to kneel, to expose my throat in a gesture of surrender. I locked my knees and forced myself to stay upright. I'd submitted to one alpha already. Look where that had gotten me. Need a ride? His voice was deep and rough, like gravel being dragged across concrete. No inflection, no emotion. Just a simple question delivered with the same enthusiasm someone might show while reading a grocery list. My mind raced through possibilities. This could be a trap. This stranger could be working with Caden. Or he could be someone even worse. There were plenty of alphas who preyed on lone omegas, who saw us as easy targets for things I didn't want to think about. But then another howl echoed through the trees, closer this time, and I heard the distant shouts of men, coordinating a search pattern. Time was up. I was out of options. Please, I whispered, my voice cracking on the single word. Please help me. The stranger's expression didn't change. He simply reached over and pushed the passenger door open from the inside, then returned to the driver's seat without another word. No questions. No demands for explanation. Just the open door and the implied offer of escape. I didn't let myself think about what I was doing. Thinking would lead to hesitation, and hesitation would lead to capture. I stumbled forward and climbed into the SUV, my bloody hand leaving a smear on the leather seat that I tried unsuccessfully to hide. The interior smelled like him, that cedar and smoke scent, but also coffee and something mechanical like oil or gunpowder. The door had barely closed before he put the vehicle in gear and accelerated smoothly down the forest road. I twisted in my seat, looking back through the rear window. The mansion's lights were visible through the trees, growing smaller with each passing second. I could see flashlights now, bobbing and weaving as the search party spread out. But they were looking in the wrong direction. They hadn't seen the SUV. We were getting away. I turned back around, my whole body starting to shake as the adrenaline began to wear off and reality set in. I'd actually done it. I'd escaped. I was free. But when I glanced at the stranger, this man who drove with mechanical precision and hadn't looked at me even once since I'd gotten in, a new kind of fear settled in my chest. His hands on the steering wheel were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who knew violence intimately. His jaw was set in a hard line, and his eyes remained fixed on the road ahead with laser focus. I'd run from one prison, but as the city lights disappeared behind us and we headed into increasingly remote territory, I couldn't shake the terrifying thought that I might have just walked straight into another. The silence inside the SUV was suffocating. I pressed myself against the passenger door, trying to make myself as small as possible while simultaneously attempting to stop my hands from shaking. The blood from my wrist had soaked through my hoodie sleeve, creating a dark stain that seemed to spread with each passing minute. I should say something. Thank him. Ask where we were going. Something. But every time I opened my mouth, the words died in my throat. The stranger drove like a machine, smooth, efficient, unnervingly calm. His eyes never left the road. His expression never changed. It was like sharing space with a statue that happened to know how to operate a motor vehicle. The only indication that he was even aware of my presence was the slight tightening of his fingers on the steering wheel whenever I shifted in my seat. I tried to piece together what I knew. The way he'd appeared at exactly the right moment felt too convenient to be coincidence. The fact that he'd offered me a ride without question suggested he'd been looking for me, or at least expecting someone like me. But why? What did he want? Alphas didn't help omegas out of the goodness of their hearts. There was always a price. The landscape outside transformed as we drove. The suburban sprawl gave way to industrial zones, then to nothing but dark highway flanked by empty fields. We'd been driving for at least 20 minutes, heading steadily away from everything familiar. My anxiety climbed with each mile marker we passed. Where are you taking me? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Somewhere safe. 2 words. That was all I got. His tone suggested the conversation was over before it had begun. I tried again. Who are you? How did you know I'd be there? This time he didn't even respond, just kept driving, his jaw set in that same hard line, his eyes fixed on the road with unwavering focus. The message was clear. He wasn't interested in small talk or explanations. I was cargo. Nothing more. My fear began to transform into frustration. I just risked everything to escape one controlling alpha. I wasn't about to hand myself over to another without at least understanding the situation. Look, I appreciate the help, but I need to know. Check the side mirror. His interruption was sharp, commanding. Tell me what you see. I twisted in my seat and looked. At first I saw nothing but darkness and the occasional tree illuminated by our taillights. Then I caught it. Small points of light moving through the forest parallel to the road. Flashlights. At least 4 of them, maybe more. My blood turned to ice. They're following the road. I breathed. They were. Not anymore. Something in his tone suggested satisfaction. We crossed pack territory boundaries 3 miles back. Caden Valeris doesn't have jurisdiction out here. I stared at him. You know Caden? His hands tightened on the wheel again, knuckles going white. Everyone in the region knows Caden Valeris. Arrogant piece of trash who thinks pack leadership gives him the right to do whatever he wants. The venom in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just casual knowledge. This was personal. How do you know about me? I pressed. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, word gets around. Omega goes missing from Valeris pack, shows signs of abuse. Suddenly the whole territory is buzzing. I had a feeling you'd make a run for it eventually. So you were waiting for me? I was in the area. He finally glanced at me, just a brief flick of those cold gray eyes. Consider it fortunate timing. I didn't believe in fortune. Not anymore. But I also didn't have the energy to argue. My wrist was throbbing, my head was pounding, and the adrenaline crash was hitting me hard. I slumped back in my seat, suddenly exhausted. What's your name? I asked quietly. Silas Creed. The name sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard whispers about Silas Creed, a rogue alpha who refused to join any pack. A man with a reputation for violence and isolation. Someone you didn't cross unless you had a death wish. And I was trapped in a vehicle with him heading into the middle of nowhere. I'm Luca, I offered, though he probably already knew. He nodded once. That was it. No further acknowledgement. No attempt at conversation. We drove in silence for another 15 minutes, before he finally turned off the main road onto what could barely be called a path. The SUV bounced over ruts and rocks, branches scraping against the sides. I gripped the door handle, my anxiety spiking again. Then the trees opened up and I saw the cabin. It was small, weathered, the kind of structure that looked like it had been standing there since before I was born. A single dim light glowed in one window. Isolated. Remote. The perfect place to hide a body where no one would ever find it. Silas killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead. Then he turned to me, and for the first time I got the full force of his attention. Those gray eyes swept over me from head to toe, clinical and assessing, like he was cataloging every injury, every weakness. You're hurt, he stated. I instinctively pulled my sleeve down further. It's just a scratch. Let me see. I said it's fine. Let me see. Not a request. A command. I hesitated, but something in his tone made it clear that arguing would be pointless. Slowly, I pulled back my sleeve, revealing the gash on my wrist. The bleeding had slowed, but the wound looked angry and raw. Probably needed stitches. Silas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Inside. Now, he got out of the SUV and came around to my side, opening the door before I could reach for the handle. I climbed out on shaky legs, my body finally registering how cold I was and how much everything hurt. Silas didn't touch me, but he positioned himself between me and the forest, alert and watchful, as he guided me toward the cabin. Inside was sparse but functional. A worn couch, a small kitchenette, a wood-burning stove that radiated blessed warmth. Everything was neat, organized, militarily precise. Silas moved to a cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit that looked professional grade, not the cheap drugstore kind. Sit, he ordered, pointing to the couch. I sat. He knelt in front of me and took my wrist in his hand. His touch was surprisingly gentle despite the roughness of his calloused fingers. He worked in silence, cleaning the wound with efficient, practiced movements. When the antiseptic hit the raw flesh, I hissed in pain and tried to pull away. His grip tightened, holding me in place. Stay still. I bit my lip and forced myself to endure it. His focus was absolute, his movements precise. This wasn't the first time he'd treated injuries. I found myself wondering what kind of life he'd lived to develop this skill set. Did Valeris do this? He asked suddenly, his voice low. I nodded. Something dangerous flashed across his face, there and gone in an instant. He finished bandaging my wrist with quick, efficient movements, then released me and stood. You can stay here tonight, he said, his tone back to neutral. Tomorrow you need to leave. My heart sank. Leave? Where am I supposed to go? Not my concern. He was already turning away, heading toward what I assumed was a bedroom. Panic surged through me. I stood up, reaching out without thinking. Please. I have nowhere else. Caden will find me if I'm on my own. He'll kill me. Silas stopped. Slowly turned back. For just a moment I saw something flicker in those cold eyes. Something that looked almost like understanding or maybe regret. But then it was gone. Replaced by that impenetrable mask. Staying with me will get you killed faster, he said quietly. I'm not someone you should trust. I don't have a choice, I whispered. We stood there, locked in a silent standoff. Finally he looked away. One night, that's all I'm offering. He disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me alone in the small living room with nothing but the crackling fire and the terrible knowledge that when morning came I'd be on my own again. Sleep never came. I spent the night curled up on Silas's couch, wrapped in a thin blanket he'd tossed at me without comment, listening to every creak and groan of the old cabin. My mind wouldn't shut off. Every sound outside could be Caden's trackers. Every shadow could be death coming for me. I'd escaped, yes, but for what? To spend one night of temporary safety before being thrown back into the world with a target on my back and nowhere to run. When dawn finally broke through the small window, painting the room in shades of gray, I felt hollowed out, exhausted but unable to rest, terrified but too numb to properly process the fear. I heard movement from the bedroom, heavy footsteps, the sound of drawers opening and closing. Then the front door opened and shut. I sat up, my body protesting every movement, and peered out the window. Silas stood in the small clearing behind the cabin, shirtless despite the February chill, splitting logs with an axe. Each swing was controlled, powerful, methodical. Sweat gleamed on his skin despite the cold. His back was a roadmap of scars, some old and faded, others newer, raised and angry, evidence of a life lived violently. I watched him work, transfixed despite myself. His body was all lean muscle and hard lines, built for function rather than aesthetics. Every movement spoke of discipline and strength, and his scent, even from inside the cabin, called to my omega instincts in a way that terrified me. I'd spent 6 months learning to suppress those instincts, to ignore the biological imperative that had gotten me into trouble in the first place. I couldn't afford to let my guard down now. He must have sensed me watching because he turned, meeting my eyes through the window. I quickly looked away, heat flooding my face. When I dared glance back, he'd returned to his work as if the moment hadn't happened. I forced myself to move, to do something useful. The cabin was clean but sparse. I found his kitchen and began making coffee with the basic supplies I found. No idea if he'd want it, but I needed to feel like I was contributing something, anything, to justify my presence. The front door opened as the coffee finished brewing. Silas entered, grabbed a shirt from a hook by the door and pulled it on. He saw the coffee, raised an eyebrow fractionally, but poured himself a cup without comment. Thank you for last night, I said, breaking the silence. For the first aid, for everything. He took a sip, his expression unreadable. Get your things. I'll drive you to the bus station. My chest tightened. That's it? Just drop me off and forget you ever saw me? That's the deal. One night. You got your one night. Silas. Please, don't. The word cut through the air like a blade. Don't beg. Don't try to appeal to my better nature. I don't have one. I'm giving you a chance to disappear. To start over somewhere Valeris can't reach. Take it. Start over with what? I couldn't keep the desperation out of my voice. I have no money, no identification. Caden kept all my documents. No skills that would get me hired anywhere legitimate. I'll last maybe a week before I'm either starving or forced into situations that make Caden look merciful. Figure it out. People survive worse. His tone was flat, final. Frustration boiled over. Why did you help me at all if you were just going to throw me away the next day? I didn't throw you away. I kept you alive. What you do with that is your responsibility, not mine. So you feel nothing? No obligation? No basic human decency? His eyes flashed. The first real emotion I'd seen from him. Human decency gets people killed. Obligations get people killed. I learned that lesson the hard way, and I'm not interested in repeating the experience. What happened? I found myself asking before I could stop myself. Who did you lose? The question hung in the air between us. Silas's jaw worked, his hands tightening around the coffee cup. For a moment I thought he might actually answer. Then his expression shut down completely, that impenetrable mask slamming back into place. Pack your things. No, he went very still. Excuse me? I said no. I lifted my chin, meeting his eyes despite the fear coursing through me. You want me gone so badly, you'll have to physically remove me, and we both know you won't do that. Don't test me, Omega. Stop calling me Omega like it's an insult. My name is Luca, and I'm not leaving until you give me a real reason why staying here is worse than being alone out there. We stood facing each other in that small kitchen, the tension thick enough to cut. I could see the war happening behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted to grab me and bodily throw me out the door warring with something else. Something he was trying very hard to suppress. Finally he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. You want the truth? Fine. Caden Valeris isn't going to stop looking for you. He's obsessive and vindictive, and he'll mobilize every resource at his disposal. When his trackers pick up your scent, and they'll follow it here. And when they come, they won't just take you. They'll burn this place to the ground. They'll kill anyone who helped you. That's the kind of man Valeris is. Then help me fight him. Silas laughed, but there was no humor in it. Fight him with what? I'm one alpha. He has an entire pack. I'm good, but I'm not suicidal. You must know people. Other rogue alphas. Betas who don't belong to packs. Build an alliance. I don't do alliances. I don't do teams. I survive alone because that's the only way to survive at all. He set his cup down with controlled force. I'm not a hero, Luca. I'm not going to ride in and save you from the big bad alpha. That's not who I am. Then who are you? I challenged. Because the man who stopped to help a bleeding Omega he'd never met, who drove him to safety and bandaged his wounds, doesn't sound like someone who only yells about himself. He moved fast, closing the distance between us in 2 strides. I backed up until I hit the counter, trapped between his arms as he leaned down, his face inches from mine. His scent overwhelmed me, made my knees weak. You don't know anything about me, he said, his voice rough. You don't know what I've done, what I'm capable of, the people I've hurt. So tell me, I whispered. For a long moment he just stared at me. I could see the conflict written across his face, the war between what he wanted to do and what he felt he should do. Then slowly he straightened and stepped back. 3 days, he said finally. I'll give you 3 days to figure out a plan, to heal, to prepare. But after that, you're gone. No arguments. No negotiations. Relief flooded through me so intensely I almost collapsed. Okay, 3 days. I can work with that. He turned away, but not before I caught something in his expression. Something that looked almost like fear, not of me but of himself, of what helping me might cost him. Stay inside, he ordered. Don't go near the windows. Don't make noise. If anyone comes, you hide. Understand? Yes. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, paused with his hand on the knob. The bathroom's through there. Take a shower. There's clean clothes in the closet. They'll be too big but better than what you're wearing. Food's in the pantry. Help yourself. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the cabin with my thoughts and the terrifying realization that I'd just convinced a dangerous man to let me stay in his home. A man with secrets. A man running from his own demons. But as I stood there in his kitchen, wearing his clothes and drinking his coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, we were both running from the same things. The 3rd day arrived with an eerie stillness that set my nerves on edge. I'd grown accustomed to the cabin's rhythms, the way Silas moved through his morning routine with military precision, the sound of wood being chopped outside, the comfortable silence that had replaced the initial tension between us. But today felt different. Wrong, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Silas felt it too. I could tell by the way he kept checking the windows, his hand never straying far from the hunting knife he kept sheathed at his belt. He'd been quieter than usual all morning, his jaw set in a hard line, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line beyond the cabin. What is it? I asked, setting down the book I'd been pretending to read. Nothing. Maybe. He moved to the window again, peering through the gap in the curtains. Just a feeling. Before I could respond, a new scent drifted through the cabin's ventilation. Faint but unmistakable. My blood turned to ice. Expensive cologne. Leather. And underneath it all, the sickly sweet smell of artificial dominance. The kind some alphas use to mask their insecurities. Caden. Silas's head snapped toward me, reading the terror that must have been written across my face. Get to the back room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you. Silas. Now Luca. I stumbled backward just as a voice called out from beyond the cabin walls, smooth as poisoned honey, carrying across the clearing with practiced ease. Luca, darling. I know you can hear me. There's no point in hiding. My legs threatened to give out. That voice. I'd heard it whisper sweet nothings and scream degrading insults. I'd heard it make promises and break them in the same breath. It was the voice of my nightmares, and it was right outside. I moved to the window despite Silas's order, unable to stop myself. Through the thin curtain, I could see him. Caden Valeris stood in the clearing like he owned it, wearing an expensive designer jacket that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his posture relaxed and confident. He looked like he'd come for a casual visit, not a confrontation. But his eyes gave him away. Even from this distance, I could see the cold calculation in them. The possessive gleam that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with control. Behind him stood 3 of his pack's enforcers, massive alphas who looked like they bench-pressed cars for fun. They were armed, I realized with growing horror. Not with guns, but with tranquilizer darts and heavy restraints. They'd come prepared to take me by force. The front door opened and Silas stepped out. He moved with deceptive casualness, but I recognized the predatory grace in his movements now. This was Silas in combat mode, every muscle coiled and ready to strike. You're trespassing, Valeris. Caden's smile widened. Am I? I wasn't aware you owned this land, Creed. According to the territorial maps, this area falls within neutral territory, which means I have every right to be here. The land might be neutral. The cabin isn't. Semantics. Caden waved his hand dismissively. I'm not here to argue property rights. I'm here to retrieve what belongs to me. His gaze shifted toward the cabin, and I instinctively stepped back from the window. Come out, Luca. We can discuss this like adults. I'm willing to forgive your little tantrum if you come home voluntarily. Forgive. The word made bile rise in my throat. He's not going anywhere with you, Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register I'd never heard before. Caden's expression hardened. You're interfering in pack business, Creed. That's a violation of the territorial accords. I could have you brought up on charges. Go ahead and try. I'm sure the council would love to hear about your unconventional methods of omega care. The air grew thick with tension. Caden's facade cracked slightly, revealing the rage simmering beneath. Careful, Creed. You don't know who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A coward who hides abuse behind pack politics. That did it. Caden's mask of civility shattered completely. His scent spiked with aggression, and his enforcers shifted forward, ready to attack on command. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't let Silas fight my battles, couldn't let him get hurt because of me. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle. Don't you dare, Silas called out without turning around. Somehow he'd known exactly what I was planning. Stay inside, but I was already opening the door, stepping out onto the small porch. Every instinct screamed at me to run back inside, to hide, to let someone else handle this. But I'd spent too many months being helpless, being silent, being compliant. Not anymore. Caden. My voice came out stronger than I'd expected. This needs to stop. His expression transformed the moment he saw me. The rage melted into something that might have passed for concern if I didn't know better. Luca. Thank God. Are you hurt? Did he force you to stay here? Threaten you? The lies came so easily to him. He actually believed his own twisted narrative. Nobody forced me to do anything. I left because you were killing me. Slowly, methodically, like one of your experiments. His jaw tightened. I was trying to help you. Your heat cycles were irregular. I was searching for a cure. You were using me as a test subject. The words exploded out of me. Months of suppressed rage finally finding their voice. You locked me in that lab for days at a time. You injected me with ones you'd never tested. You treated me like I was broken, defective, worthless, because you were. He caught himself, tried to soften his tone. You are. Medically speaking. I was trying to there's nothing to fix. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I'm not defective. I'm not broken. I'm just different. And you couldn't accept that because it meant you couldn't control every aspect of me. Caden took a step forward. Silas immediately moved to block him and the enforcers tensed, hands moving to their weapons. "Stand down, Creed," Caden said softly. "This is between me and my Omega." "I'm not your Omega," I said clearly. "I never was. You forced a bond on me when I was vulnerable and alone. You manipulated me into thinking I had no other options. But I'm men. I reject you, Caden Valeris. Completely and permanently." The silence that followed was absolute. In the Omega Alpha dynamic, rejection was the ultimate severance, a public declaration that the bond was unwanted and invalid. It held legal weight if witnessed properly. Caden's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, and finally pure murderous rage. His scent turned acrid with fury, making my eyes water. "You ungrateful little," he lunged forward. Silas moved like lightning. One moment he was standing still, the next he had Caden pinned against a tree, forearm pressed against his throat. The enforcers rushed forward, but Silas's voice stopped them both. "Touch me and he dies." "I don't bluff." Caden struggled, but Silas's grip was iron. "You're making a huge mistake, Creed. I have resources, connections. I can make your life a living hell. You can try." Silas leaned in closer. "But understand this. If you come after him again, if you even think about him, I will personally ensure that every pack in the region knows exactly what you did. I have evidence, medical records, testimony, enough to destroy you." It was a bluff. Silas couldn't possibly have that kind of documentation. But Caden didn't know that. I watched uncertainty flicker across his face. Silas released him and stepped back. "Leave. Now. And don't come back." Caden straightened his jacket, trying to salvage some dignity. His eyes found mine, and the hatred in them was palpable. "This isn't over. You belong to me, legally and biologically. When I return, and I will return, there won't be anywhere you can hide." He turned and walked away, his enforcers falling into step behind him. But the threat hung in the air like smoke, poisonous and choking. When they were finally out of sight, Silas turned to me. His expression was unreadable, but his hands were shaking slightly, the only sign of how much that confrontation had cost him. "Are you all right?" he asked. I nodded, then shook my head, then started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that turned into tears. Silas caught me as my legs gave out, holding me steady while I fell apart. "He's coming back," I whispered against his chest. "He won't stop. He'll bring his whole pack next time." "I know." Silas's arms tightened around me. "But by then, we'll be ready." The confrontation changed everything between us. After Caden left, Silas transformed the cabin into a fortress. He spent hours reinforcing the doors with heavy wooden beams, installing makeshift alarm systems using wire and bells, and setting snares in the surrounding forest that would alert us to any approaching danger. He worked with single-minded intensity, barely sleeping, barely eating, driven by a need to protect that bordered on obsessive. I tried to help, but he kept assigning me tasks that kept me inside, away from windows, away from any potential line of sight from the forest. It felt like being caged again, and the walls seemed to close in a little more each day. On the fourth day after the confrontation, I finally snapped. "I can't do this anymore." I stood in the doorway of his bedroom, where he was cleaning and checking a collection of weapons I hadn't known he possessed. "I can't just sit here waiting for the next attack. I feel like I'm suffocating." Silas didn't look up from the knife he was sharpening. "It's temporary. Once we figure out our next move." "What next move?" "You keep saying that, but you won't actually discuss what we're going to do. Are we leaving? Are we staying and fighting? Are you planning to hand me over to save yourself?" The last question came out more bitter than I'd intended. That got his attention. He set down the knife and finally met my eyes. "You really think I'd do that?" "I don't know what to think. You won't talk to me. You barely look at me. It's like you're already regretting getting involved." "Regretting?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Luca, if I regretted helping you, you wouldn't still be here. Then what is this? This distance? This constant avoidance?" He stood abruptly and I took an involuntary step back. The movement seemed to hurt him and he stopped, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I'm trying to keep you alive," he said quietly. "That means staying focused. Not getting distracted." "Distracted by what?" The look he gave me was answer enough. Heat flooded my face and suddenly the small room felt even smaller. "We need to talk about what happened." I said, forcing myself to hold his gaze. Before Caden showed up, what you told me about Owen, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have, don't. I moved closer, close enough to smell his scent, that cedar and smoke that had become oddly comforting. Don't take it back. Don't pretend it didn't matter. It matters too much, he admitted. That's the problem. Owen died because I cared too much and did too little. I can't make that mistake again. So you're going to care too little and do too much? That's not balance, Silas. That's just a different kind of prison. He turned away, bracing his hands against the wall. The muscles in his back were taut with tension, and I could see old scars peeking out from beneath his shirt collar. Physical reminders of battles fought and survived. My brother was 17 when he died, Silas said, his voice rough. 17? He should have had his whole life ahead of him. Should have found a mate who loved him, had a family, been happy. Instead, he ended up in the hands of a monster who saw him as property, and I stood by and let it happen because I was too weak, too scared, too useless to stop it. You were 16, old enough to know better, old enough to fight harder. He turned back to me, and the anguish in his eyes stole my breath. Do you know what the worst part is? When I finally went back for him, when I'd trained enough and gotten strong enough to challenge that Owen begged me to leave him there. Said he wasn't worth saving. That he was too broken to fix. Tears pricked my eyes. Silas, I tried anyway. Fought my way into that compound, took down half the guards, got all the way to Owen's room, and you know what he did? He locked the door. Wouldn't let me, told me to run before they killed me too. His voice cracked. That was the last conversation we ever had, through a locked door with him telling me he wasn't worth the effort. I closed the distance between us, placing my hand over his heart. It was racing, pounding against my palm like a trapped bird. What happened to Owen wasn't your fault, I said firmly, and what's happening to me isn't the same situation. I'm not locked away somewhere. I'm here with you, by choice, and I'm asking you to let me in. Really let me in. If I do that, if I let myself feel what I'm trying not to feel, and something happens to you. He covered my hand with his. I won't survive it, Luca. I barely survived losing Owen. Losing you would destroy me. Then don't lose me. I stood on my toes, bringing our faces closer together. Fight for me. With me. Not alone, not by pushing me away, but together. That's what Owen Mead and didn't get. Don't make the same mistake twice. For a long moment we stood there, frozen in that charged space between restraint and surrender. I could see the war happening behind his eyes. Duty versus desire, protection versus connection, fear versus hope. Then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate and consuming, like a man drowning and finally finding air. His hands came up to cup my face, thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized I was crying. I grabbed fistfuls of his shirt, pulling him closer, needing to eliminate every inch of space between us. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead against mine. I'm terrified, he whispered, of failing you, of not being enough, of watching you suffer the way Owen did. I'm terrified too, I admitted, but I'm more afraid of facing this alone, of not having you, of never knowing what we could be together. His arms wrapped around me. And for the first time since the confrontation, I felt truly safe. Not because he was strong or capable or dangerous, but because he was willing to be vulnerable with me, to admit his fears instead of hiding behind cold efficiency. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, just holding each other, finding comfort in shared warmth and steady heartbeats. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the cabin in shades of gold and amber. Then, cutting through the peaceful silence, came a sound that made my blood run cold. Howling. Multiple voices, coordinated and close. Too close. Silas tensed, his entire body going rigid. He released me and moved to the window in one fluid motion, peering through the gap in the curtains. I watched his expression shift from concern to grim determination. How many? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Too many to count in this light. At least 20, maybe more. He turned back to me and there was something new in his eyes now. Not fear but fierce resolve. He brought his whole pack. This isn't a threat anymore. It's war. My heart hammered against my ribs. What do we do? Silas moved to the weapons collection and began strapping knives to his belts, checking ammunition and firearms I'd hoped he'd never need to use. We fight. I've called in some favors. We won't be completely alone. But Luca, he stopped, looking at me with devastating intensity. Whatever happens tonight, I need you to know something. What? I don't regret any of this. Meeting you, helping you, falling for you. Even if tonight ends badly, I wouldn't change a single moment. Before I could respond, before I could tell him I felt the same way, the howling grew louder, closer, and through the window I saw the first flicker of torches moving through the trees. Caden had returned, and this time he'd brought an army. The cabin became a war zone in the span of a heartbeat. Silas's allies arrived first, 7 rough-looking alphas and betas who moved with the efficiency of seasoned fighters. They took positions around the cabin without needing instruction, setting up defensive perimeters and readying weapons. I recognized the grim determination on their faces. This wasn't their first battle, and they knew the odds weren't in our favor. Through the window I counted at least 25 of Caden's wolves surrounding us. Torches held high, weapons glinting in the firelight. They'd formed a loose circle, cutting off all escape routes. It was a siege formation, designed to trap and overwhelm. Caden stood at the front, looking more like a general commanding troops than the polished alpha I'd once known. His expensive jacket was gone, replaced by tactical gear. This wasn't about retrieving lost property anymore. This is about making an example. Creed. His voice boomed across the clearing. You have one chance to end this peacefully. Send the Omega out, and my quarrel is with you alone. Refuse, and everyone in that cabin dies tonight. Silas stepped onto the porch, unarmed but radiating danger. You want him? Come take him. If you can. The challenge hung in the air. I saw several of Caden's wolves shift uncomfortably. They'd heard stories about Silas Creed, about his reputation for surviving impossible odds. Fear was a weapon too, and Silas wielded it expertly. Caden's smile was predatory. So be it. You had your chance. He gave a signal and chaos erupted. The first wave of attackers came from 3 sides simultaneously. Silas's allies met them with brutal efficiency, and suddenly the night was filled with the sounds of combat, snarls, impacts, the sharp crack of bone against bone. I pressed myself against the cabin wall, heart racing, watching through the window as Silas moved through the fight like a force of nature. He was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Every strike was calculated, every movement precise. He didn't waste energy on flourishes or intimidation. He simply disabled opponents with clinical efficiency and moved to the next threat. But there were too many. For every attacker that went down, 2 more seemed to take their place. I watched one of Silas's allies fall, clutching a wounded shoulder. Then another went down, overwhelmed by 3 opponents at once. I couldn't just hide here. Couldn't let them fight my battle while I cowered like the helpless Omega everyone assumed I was. My hands shook as I searched the cabin for anything I could use. Not weapons, I had no training. Would be more liability than help in hand-to-hand combat. But maybe there was another way. In the kitchen I found what I needed. Dish soap, cooking oil, and every bottle of alcohol Silas had stocked. I worked quickly, mixing them in large containers, creating a slick, flammable mixture. It wasn't sophisticated, but it might buy us time. Carrying the containers to the back door, I waited for an opening. When 3 of Caden's wolves tried to flank the cabin from behind, I threw open the door and dumped the mixture across the ground in front of them. They slipped, stumbled, crashed into each other in a tangle of limbs. Luca, get back inside. Silas's roar carried even over the sounds of fighting, but I was already lighting the second container, watching the alcohol ignite in a wall of blue flame that separated the fallen wolves from the cabin. It wouldn't hold them long, but it was something. I was fighting back. The distraction cost us. While Silas was looking my way, Caden struck. He moved with alpha speed, closing the distance and landing a devastating blow that sent Silas sprawling. Before Silas could recover, 2 more wolves pinned him down. Caden stood over him, breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Not so untouchable now, are you? Caden drove his boot into Silas's ribs, and I heard the sickening crack even from where I stood. Something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the trauma, all the months of being helpless, it crystallized into pure burning rage. I stepped out of the cabin, walking straight toward Caden with my head held high. Stop! The fight paused. Everyone turned to look at me, This omega who'd spent so long running, now walking directly toward the alpha who'd tormented him. Caden's expression transformed into triumphant smugness. Finally coming to your senses? Let them go, I said, my voice steady despite the terror singing through my veins. All of them. This is between you and me. Always has been. Luca, don't. Silas struggled against the wolves holding him, but they tightened their grip. I ignored him, keeping my focus on Caden. You want me back? Fine. I'll come willingly. Just end this. No more fighting. No more bloodshed. Caden studied me for a long moment, suspicion warring with satisfaction on his face. Then he smiled. Smart choice. I knew you'd see reason eventually. He reached for my arm, but I stepped back, just out of reach. On one condition, I continued. You let Silas and his people leave safely, unharmed. No retaliation, no revenge. They walk away and you never come after them. You're not in a position to make demands. Yes, I am. I lifted my chin higher. Because if you don't agree, I'll reject you formally, right here, in front of witnesses from multiple packs. The shame of a public rejection would destroy your reputation. You'd be the alpha who couldn't even keep one omega. The silence that followed was absolute. Caden's face went through several shades of red and I could smell his rage spiking. Around us, wolves from both sides watched with rapt attention. I'd called his bluff, and everyone knew it. Fine, he finally ground out. They leave unharmed. After you submit to reclamation. I looked at Silas one last time, trying to memorize every detail of his face. The fierce gray eyes. The scar on his jaw. The way he was looking at me now, with horror and understanding and something that looked heartbreakingly like love. I'm sorry, I mouthed. Then I turned back to Caden and did something I'd been planning since the moment I walked out of the cabin. I dropped to my knees, bowed my head in submission, and spoke the words that would change everything. I, Luca Bennett, formally reject the bond of Caden Valeris. Before these witnesses, I declare it null, void, and unwanted. I reject his claim, his mark, and his authority over me. The words had power. Legal power. Witnessed by members of multiple packs. Caden's face went white with shock, then purple with rage. Before he could finish, before he could react, a new voice cut through the night. Authoritative, powerful, impossible to ignore. That's quite enough. From the forest emerged an older man in formal council robes, flanked by guards wearing official insignias. Elder Marcus, head of the regional council. Behind him came more guards, easily outnumbering Caden's remaining wolves. Caden Valeris. Elder Marcus continued, his voice like iron. You've been served with formal charges of omega abuse, illegal confinement, and authorized medical experimentation. The council has reviewed evidence submitted by multiple sources. You're to be taken into custody immediately. Caden's world crumbled in real time. His wolves stepped back, unwilling to interfere with council authority. His power, his status, his carefully constructed empire, all of it dissolving like smoke. This is a setup, Caden snarled. You can't prove. We have medical records. Testimony from former pack members. Physical evidence from your laboratory. Elder Marcus gestured, and guards moved forward with restraints. It's over, Valeris. As they led him away, still protesting, still threatening, I felt the last chains of fear fall away. The wolves holding Silas released him and he staggered to his feet, clutching his ribs but alive. He crossed the distance between us in 3 painful strides and pulled me into his arms, holding me like I might disappear if he let go. You magnificent, terrifying, brilliant idiot, he whispered against my hair. Don't ever do that to me again. I laughed, the sound half sob. No promises. Around us the battlefield was clearing. Caden's wolves dispersed, leaderless and lost. Silas's allies tended wounds and counted their victories. Elder Marcus approached us with something resembling approval on his weathered face. Well played, young Omega. The evidence Creed provided was damning, but your public rejection sealed it. Valeris will never hold alpha status again. I looked up at Silas. You contacted the council? The night he first showed up. Sent them everything I could find on his methods, his victims, his violations. He touched my face gently. I told you I don't bluff. 3 months later I stood in the same clearing, but everything was different. The cabin had been repaired, expanded, transformed from a hiding place into a home. Silas's allies had become friends. The council had officially sanctioned our bond, removing any legal claims Caden might have tried to make, and Caden himself sat in a council prison, awaiting trial for crimes that would keep him locked away for decades. I leaned into Silas's embrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, his arms wrapped around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. I turned in his arms, meeting those gray eyes that had once seemed so cold and now held nothing but warmth. "Not a single one." He kissed me then, gentle and sure, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was finally truly home.